Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Canadian Institute for Public Safety Research and Treatment's COVID-19 Virtual Town Hall Series. My name is Emily Kosick, and I'm the Knowledge Manager at CIPSRT. Today, we'd like to begin with a moment of silence since it is the National Day of Mourning for those who lost their lives in the workplace. Thank you. Our topic today is coping with the stress of COVID-19 for public safety personnel. We're going to have a presentation followed by a panel discussion and a question and answer period. We do encourage you to send your questions for the panels and presenter through the question box throughout the presentation so they can be answered at the end. Now I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. First, we have Megan Provost, who is the Director of Workplace Wellness and Employee Wellbeing at Corrections Service Canada. Hi, Megan. All right, next we have Christine Godden. She is the Assistant Coordinator for Peer Support for the Peer Support Team at Ottawa Paramedic Service. Hi, Christine. Next we have Scott Patey, and he's the Co-Coordinator for Peer Support for the Ottawa Fire Services. Then we have Angie Boucher, Director of Workplace Wellbeing for the RCMP. You want to give a wave there, Angie? Hi, Angie. Next we have Sergeant Joy Prince, and she's a peer-to-peer coordinator for RCMP F Division. And so if you want to give a wave there for us, thanks, Joy. And lastly, we have our presenter today, who is Jeff Sitch. He's a registered psychologist and clinical director of the Alberta Critical Incident Provincial Network. And so, Jeff, I'm going to let you go ahead and start sharing your screen and starting the presentation.
Just give me a second here. Good morning or afternoon, everybody. There we go. First of all, I want to thank CIPSRT for the invitation to participate in this webinar. Today, what I want to talk about is coping with stress. And before we do that, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself. As was said, I work with about 100 public safety personnel organizations to help establish mental health resiliency and response before, after, and during exposure to critical incidents. I'm also a psychologist where I provide assessment and treatment for those that might be affected or have psychological injuries as a result of their service. Part of what I do and focus on is an evidence-based form of coping with stress, commonly called mental health first aid or resiliency training. And I'm going to be talking to you from that vantage point of the information that we know about stress and how to cope. Before I start, I want to just let you know that as we know, the situation with COVID-19 is always evolving. And what we're talking about and presenting and discussing here is really based on what is known today and is based on an evidence-based program called the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation Critical Incident Stress Management Program. And that's what I'm going to be presenting on. To get started, the first thing that I'd like to point out is when we talk to people about stress, commonly they're very adept at describing what causes their stress. But when we ask people to define stress, or we ask them to identify how stress is impacting them, they struggle to put a definition or to really identify the signs. So I want to start by just having a discussion about what stress is. So first of all, stress really is part of everyday life. Everybody has it, but it really is unique in public safety personnel, and that the level of stress that they must start their shift with or their tour or rotation with is higher than that for the general population. And then what they're exposed to both operationally, what they go and do in their line of work, and also organizationally, that also can prevent or can present some levels of stress. So what we know is that stress can lead to a psychological injury. It can lead to impacting a person's ability to function. And I want to talk about that today. While the stressor that we're focused on is COVID-19, what I want to do is have more of a broad view and understanding of stress, because we know that many people in our nation are affected regionally by different events that have transpired over the last week and over the last 24 hours. Everything from community shootings to even flooding in regions of the province that I'm in right now. So that while we know that COVID-19 is occurring, regular duties really haven't stopped as well. So I just want to recognize that I want to talk about that from a global point of view. What we do know about this unique type of stress is that the nature of the work that public safety are doing, they also are impacted by the restrictions, whether they be community distancing, the use of PPE, even operational changes outside the norm, and that can increase the level of stress. So what I want to do again is talk about these unique aspects of stress, some of the signs and symptoms. It really is part of what we call mental health first aid or resiliency training. So there are a couple of different types of stress. The most common understanding or the most commonly experienced are the everyday life stresses. And then I want to talk about these unique aspects of the types of stress, how it affects us psychologically, how stress and performance are related, the 5 domains or symptoms that exist in response to stress, and then give you some tips as to how you might cope during this pandemic with stress. So let's get started. So the first thing is we all have this general type of stress. It's what our body needs to do to meet demands that we're exposed to on a day-to-day basis. It's what gets us up in the morning. It's what gets us to work on time. It's what gets us to respond to the natural demands in the world around us. And for the most part, once we've met those demands, the stress goes away. Our body stops to react. It resets itself. But for most people, in fact, in this day and age, we have this thing called cumulative stress, which is that it builds up over time. It's unrelenting. It never turns off. Our body never resets. It starts to become pervasive in all aspects of our life, not just personal, but also our professional work. And that it builds and builds and builds and has a cumulative aspect, not only in our behaviors, but in our physiology. And I'll go into that in just a few minutes. What we also know is that for public safety personnel, first responders, there are 2 types of unique stressors or stress. The first one being critical incident stress. And what critical incident stress? It is a situation that overwhelms an individual's ability to access their normal coping strategies. It's not defined by the nature of the incident or the event. It really is defined by the impact that it has on an individual. And if we sort of contrast that with post-traumatic stress, where the event clearly is outside the normal range of exposure, that then has the impact of really having an effect on that person's physiology and psychology, their ability to cope. We really see the difference between critical incident stress as being a normal reaction to some event, where post-traumatic stress is almost that high extreme, intense, abnormal event that also produces an abnormal, or in fact, it's a normal response that if it goes on for a period of time can really impact us. So those are the types of stress that we experience where public safety personnel are more likely to be consistently and routinely exposed to both critical incident stress and post-traumatic stress, where the general population probably have very limited exposure versus the day-to-day exposure that we see in public safety personnel. So the unique stresses that public safety personnel have with regards to the operations, what they do, what they see in their line of work, has to do with really what we call these 10 or 11 factors. We've added in the last one during this time of COVID-19, which is moral injury. But let me just talk to you a little bit about the types of operational stresses that we know are more likely to have a psychological impact that can disrupt a person's ability to cope. And that if we are aware that these can exist, we then have the possibility of preparing people for them and being able to respond when they've been identified, when these situations occur. So I often am talking to public safety personnel, and I sort of say anything sudden can actually increase that response, that stress response. And I get feedback saying everything we do is sudden. We get a tone that goes off, we go running out the door. Well, we get a page, we go running out of the door. So I'd like to sort of have you think about this as something unexpected. That yes, your job is all about suddenness, but what about something unexpected? How many times have you maybe shown up at a call not expecting or that what you're dispatched to doesn't necessarily reference really what you show up and find? We know that the types of responses where there's a higher level of intensity, where it's a longer duration, where maybe even there's a higher level of loss. And then we also know that age has a factor, and age really impacts public safety personnel and the level of stress in really two ways. First thing, anything to do with children has an added risk of a psychological injury or this stress response, but also if the age has a personal meaning. So think about if in your family you have somebody of a certain age with a certain degenerative disease or process, and you respond in the nature of your work to somebody of the same age with the same disease or the same degenerative process. It really is that relationship or that relating to that person where it sort of gets through that professional armor and can become sort of more personal. Injury to death or relatives and friends, we know that the majority of public safety personnel actually work in more remote areas, more interconnectedness, and there's an increased risk of responding to people that you know that you have relationships with, even only your own family, and that has that added danger of an escalated stress response. We talk about this availability of resources, and in COVID-19 right now, whether it be PPE, whether it be ventilators and all those different things, we look at not only the equipment and whether or not the equipment is available to you, but we also look at whether or not, and this goes down to that next level, that do you have the resources internally to cope with the stress that is part of your job? We know that new recruits, first experiences, level of education can also increase the stress response. The first time that many of our public safety personnel to go to certain types of calls that are maybe beyond what they expected or trained for can have an added level of stress. And then this idea of moral injury, which is really sort of borne out in this COVID-19 response, which is being asked to do things, being instructed to do things that maybe go against your morals, your ethics, even maybe your best practice, that there's adaptations to what you do in response to this pandemic, but that they really don't mesh with what you think is best, both either for you, your colleagues, or even for the people, the population that you come in contact with. Organizational stress. There's a lot of research coming out on the aspect of not just what public safety personnel see in their work, but also the environment that they work in. And I want to say first that I don't know that many organizations form the intent of causing these stressors, but we do know that there's reported that these things have an impact on public safety personnel. So again, not surprisingly, heavy workload and time pressures, feedback, whether it be negative or a lack of feedback, a lack of decision making or even participation in the decision making. But I want to go down to this third bullet, which is any job where there's a requirement for a sense of emotional empathy relating to the people that you're also serving, that can actually add a level of stress. We know that bureaucracy, dealing with coworkers, inconsistency, different rules, different leadership styles, those can also create an added level of stress. And feeling like that different rules apply to different people, or that you're always having to prove yourself to the organization, again, can escalate that stress response. So why is this important? Why is it important to understand what stress is? Well, I want to now move to really how stress impacts us. So this graph really focuses on that prior to our exposure to stress or a crisis or a critical incident or traumatic stress, we're largely thought-driven individuals. We think, therefore, we feel. We're able to think our way through our daily life, our daily exposures, and then emotions rise out of that. But moving to post-exposure to stress or a crisis, a critical incident, what happens is our body reacts in such a way where it releases a stress hormone called cortisol that really shuts off our parts of our brain and how it processes information. Largely it's the frontal lobe that sort of down regulates, and then the emotional center up regulates. So what does this frontal lobe do? Well, it's the part of our brain that understands consequences, that has logical thinking, problem solving. So what happens is that gets circumvented and the emotions take over and our ability to think declines significantly. So pre-crisis, pre-exposure to stress, we largely are thought-driven, where our emotions follow. After exposure to stress or a crisis, it is hard to think because the emotions are really driving it. Just think about it in your own life. Have you ever been really angry at somebody? Have you really found it difficult to think about anything besides that anger? If you say yes, then that might be an indicator of exactly what we're talking about. So how is stress and performance related? So on this slide here, we see three distinct areas. The first box off to your left is pre-crisis. The middle box is during the crisis. And then the far right box is after the crisis is over. So what we know is that for most people, before a crisis or stress exists, we're functioning. And so you follow that line over to the left, to the far right, that sort of says they're functional. So we get through life. We have coping strategies. We're able to respond. We're able to meet needs and demands. And then there's a point of impact where stress, critical incident, something happens. And for most of us, we see a pattern of disorganized performance or behaviors, meaning that, as I just said, that stress impacts us in such a way that it impedes our ability to access our normal, healthy coping strategies. But the only person that really is unaware of this is usually the person that's affected. That what we see if we're observing this person is disorganized behavior, performance declines, and we see a series of trial and error to try to cope through this stressful period. But you see the dotted line? Well, the dotted line is usually where the person who has been impacted sort of tries to function. We're naturally wired to want to continue to keep doing what we're doing, despite the fact that maybe our behaviors, maybe our performance is actually becoming more problematic or declining. So think about this as a public safety personnel. How many times have you responded to a civilian where maybe something horrific has happened to them, but their focus is, I've just got to get home to get dinner ready, or I've just got to pick up the kids. You've probably seen in your public safety world and role many civilians who walk that dotted line despite serious injury or a stressful event. They're sort of almost unaware. They just want to keep on track of what they're doing, despite the fact that they may not be safe or they may not be able to sort of find their way through or perform. So what happens during this crisis phase is people can either get stuck for long periods of time, they can quickly return back up to functioning, or in fact, the good news is that we now have this phenomenon called post-traumatic growth, which means that in fact, if we are impacted and we have strategies to cope with the stress and to help return back to normal, we actually can have an inoculative effect against stress in the future, where we can now see an improved level of stress or post-traumatic growth. So what's really important, and now I'm going to sort of take you to the realm, and as I have a captive audience here, I like to use this to build some resiliency within you. So we really believe, all the literature says, that to be sort of have this information allows you to be able to respond to it in three distinct ways. Number one, by knowing how stress affects you, it helps build this resistance to stress, almost like this inoculative effect. That when you go through stressful times, if you recognize how it's impacting you early, it allows you to start to institute behaviors to cope, strategies to cope. And then if those strategies don't work and you continue to struggle, it helps you reach out for what we call recovery, which is accessing supports. So let me take you through just a couple of the different signs and symptoms from each one of the domains. So first of all, that stress hormone cortisol that gets released, it changes our physiology. Everything from sort of GI upset, stomach upset, muscle tension, headaches, those are some of the physical signs that we are impacted by stress. The cognitive signs, again, a fancy word for thinking, is that stress changes our thinking. The emotions go up, our thinking goes down. It's hard to problem solve. We lose track of time. We lose track of understanding consequences. People describe it like being in a fog. Emotional. The emotional aspects is, and the most common one that we hear in public safety personnel, is I have a shorter fuse, I'm more irritable, I'm less tolerant. The other aspect is we see profound sadness, maybe some guilt or shame, maybe even fears that weren't there before. Once we start to see these three areas change, physical, cognitive, and emotional, we start to see the behaviors change. We start to see people acting in ways that is out of character for them. Maybe they are more withdrawn, maybe they are more impulsive. But yeah, it really is changes from that individual's baseline behaviors. The final part that we see is spiritual. And I don't mean spiritual in our relationship with a God, but what we sort of say is there's this change in relationship to our worldview. Existential angst is another way to sort of comprehend it or think about it, is that we start to see people who have greater sort of questions about the world and them in it. How could this happen? And we start to see these questioning. So these are the 5 indicators that people experience, these 5 domains that stress is having an impact on their life. So what do we do? Well, first of all, we have 3 practices or 3 areas of focus: resistance, resiliency, and recovery. So what we do in the programs that I work in is we actually teach people about these signs and symptoms right from new recruit right through to retirement. We keep revisiting it. We help to build almost like an inoculative effect, which is, here's some of the things that can affect you in the role that you're in, the operational aspect, the organizational aspect. Here are the 5 areas that stress can show up in your life. Here's how it changes your thinking and your performance. And so we get people to recognize and be aware of these things before they occur. Resiliency training is really being able to say, okay, now that you have that knowledge, what plan do you have in place to respond to stress when it shows up in your life? And the third phase is this recovery, having a plan of recovery. Who is your go-to? What are your go-tos? Where do you get help? Who are the people that understand you, either support-wise on a more of a social connection role to professional role? And so we really encourage people to really not just focus on responding after bad things happen and people are impacted, but to start the conversation early on understanding that this will be a stressful situation. One of the ways that I'd like to recommend that people do this is that they start early by and maybe you can do it right now as you're listening to this webinar, is do a personal inventory on how stress shows up in your body, how you're changing things, how your thinking changes, how your world changes when stress is high. Then make a list of the things that you normally do that helps you get through those stressful times. Makes it far easier to do it now when stress might be low or moderate than maybe when it is very high and it's hard to think about what to do. So We know that stress is a part of everyday life. We know that the unique stress of COVID-19 is that a lot of times there's a perception of things are out of control, things are out of the norm. But one of the ways that we would encourage people to cope is look at what is within their control. Look at, as much as the world has changed and our lives have changed, is there something positive that is coming out of that change? Maybe it's more time with your family. Maybe it is a slower pace. Maybe it is being able to challenge yourself to do things that you never thought possible or that you'd never been called on upon before. So these are some of the strategies to cope with stress, which is to be aware of stress and know what it is and how it impacts you. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Emily.
Hi. All right. Thank you very much, Jeff, for that wonderful presentation. I am going to ask our panel to pop back on. I'll turn my video off so that you can all pop up. All right. Welcome back, everybody. So I am going to start with a quick discussion by our panel, just based on some of the stuff that Jeff went through. And so it is a bit of a two-part question that I'm going to start with. And so the question is, what has your organization or team done to support your members? And the second part is, are there any positive changes or things that you've learned from this experience that will help you going forward? So Angie, I'm going to start with you to answer the question first. Oh, we're having a bit of trouble hearing you. You're not muted, but if you could turn your sound up, perhaps. Sometimes it controls both. No, still having trouble, I'm afraid.
Okay, hold on a second.
Oh, there we go.
Let's see here. Can you hear me now? Okay, better? Okay, all right. So really, a crisis happens, like a pandemic, for instance, it has a big impact on employees. And one of the things that we have to remember as an organization at frontline members is the impact it will have on them personally, because not only are they have a bigger exposure rate, but also bringing that back to their families, which added some stress to them personally, right? So we have a vast support system in the RCMP that provides them with information or resources they can tap into. For instance, we have our peer-to-peer coordinator program who are very, very much involved when something like this happens, providing help to the frontline support, anybody who needs assistance. During the pandemic, for instance, one of the initiatives that they took upon themselves was to reach out to all employees and really gauge what they needed. If they were in self-isolation for whatever reason, they would go out, get groceries, and pick up the drop off of groceries and things like that, promoting all of our internal services. When this happens, they might not know where to get help because they're not used to asking for help. So we provide all the information that they need in terms of the employee assistance program, or through Health Canada. The LifeSpeak has also good resources that we that have provided them with all the information that they need to take care of themselves. It's really all about self-care. We have the support for operational stress injury program as well, who are also very much involved. And we created guides for employees and their families, where they can get information, where they can get their resources, anything that they're looking for. And really, in these times of crises, communication is really key. in this case. And so we have our commissioner who has been providing daily updates on what has been happening on the front lines, how it impacted our employees. Again, reiterating where to get help, how to get help, all the crisis line numbers, and all of the above. As well as our national mental health champion has also been really involved, providing daily broadcasts on where to get help, how to ask for help. And we've also created some fact sheets on all the impacts that COVID-19 can have on a person, how to talk to your kids about COVID-19, how to avoid getting exposed, and quality sleep, getting quality sleeps. And with the gym closures, that has had a big impact on our frontline members as well, where to get exercise, how to exercise at home, helpful tips on how to exercise at home during COVID-19 and self-isolation. And as well as the fact sheet on how to take care of themselves, right?
Angie, I'm just going to stop you for 1 second. We're just getting a little bit of lag on your sound. So I think if you turn your video off for a moment and continue speaking, you should be okay. It's probably just your bandwidth dropping.
Agency of Canada has been providing a lot information that we've been transmitting to all our employees to make sure that they know what's going on out there, what information is out there, because the pandemic itself has been so fast and coming. So we
You can go ahead now, Angie. We can. It's caught up now that your video is dropped off. So if you want to go ahead with your answer.
You hear me? Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Working at home is great, but I don't have the best technology at home, so sorry about that. One of the things I wanted to mention is that for the second part of your question, the positive change in what we have learned through COVID-19 in the RCMP is that although information is key, there is an overwhelming amount of information that is available out there, and it was trying to contain all that information so it's pertinent to employees. So the fact sheets that I've spoken about, and I can share them if you want after this, those have been really key in getting our frontline members all the information they needed, but just containing all the information because it's been overwhelming, and we need to make sure that the people know where to get the information. So that's one of the things that we have learned through this COVID-19. Although we want to communicate to our employees, we have to be careful not to overwhelm them with information either.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that answer, Angie. And sorry we can't have you on video. Sometimes it just strains the bandwidth, I guess. Joy, if you want to go ahead and add anything from your end to that question.
Thanks, Emily. Building on what Angie had said, in F Division or Saskatchewan, for people who aren't in the RCMP organization, we do have resources that are available to assist our employees and their families moving forward, whether it's COVID-19 or any other traumatic event or personal situation that people have going on in their own lives. The big thing to do for myself is, no matter if you are corrections, police, fire, EMS, is knowing what your resources are at the front end. So if you are exposed to a traumatic event, potentially traumatic event, you have those go-to people or resources to help you through a difficult time. For us here, we have our chaplaincy program. We have 22 chaplains across the province that provide support to RCMP employees and their families. We have our CISM team, so our critical incident management team, which we have mental health professionals in addition to our employees who go out and provide that assistance with them. And after a traumatic event, you know, we have regular members, civilian members, and volunteer chaplains in that group that would go out and give that support to our people. We have our fitness and health promotion unit. So during COVID-19 or even the day-to-day activities, as in a policing organization, we still have a job to do. So how do we do that job most effectively? So with our fitness and health promotion unit, of course, they would focus on fitness. What can you do in the situation that we are in now with COVID-19? They can help with ergonomics, working from home, nutrition, you know, as I said, fitness, anything to do with that, fatigue, stress, sleep, of course, we're impacted that way as well. We also have our informal conflict management. So things get stressful and tough for people, whether you're in a unit, detachment. Sometimes, you know, this type of COVID-19 plays an impact on us. And what can we do when the conflict increases in our unit? You know, we can use our external practitioners that are available, our practitioners in Alberta who are assisting us right now in helping manage those things. From a peer-to-peer perspective, for myself, we have 21 peer-to-peer people across the province, regular members, civilian members, and public service employees. So no matter what role you have in the organization, something like COVID-19 may play an impact on, are you working from home or are you working in the office? Are you going to be isolated in your police car for most of the shift, you know, ensuring that social distancing while you're in between calls? So we have those peer-to-peer people who are reaching out to our employees and who our employees can reach out to give that support and be able to provide the information on resources that Angie has provided and the ones that I've provided here in our unit, in the workplace relations unit. As all the resources that I provided to you guys, we fall under one umbrella, which is the workplace relations unit. And our goal as the workplace relations unit is to provide, promote, and contribute to employee wellness as a whole with whatever service it is that you need, in addition to SOCI, EAP, etc. One of the other things that we have done during COVID-19 is we have done a weekly newsletter as a unit, which goes out through our emergency and management relations officer on a weekly basis. It gives tools and tricks, things to do with your family, things to do for yourself for fitness and wellness, nutrition, you know, other things that may have an emotional impact on us as we are going through this. But also we can take the information, as Jeff had said in his great presentation, that not only during COVID-19, but other major events that we deal with, you know, how can we use the information that we've had communicated to us to move forward and make us the best people that we can be and the healthiest, whether it be for ourselves and our coworkers, but also for our families and our loved ones who depend on us to stay well and be in a good place.
All right, didn't unmute myself. Thank you very much for that response there, Joy. Megan, if you want to go ahead and answer for your organization.
Great, thank you. So at Correctional Services Canada, we also have several initiatives that support effective stress management. So for example, we're finalizing the strategy for workplace wellness and employee well-being. We also have our CISM practitioners, and we also do training. So going back to the presentation, trying to provide as much information at the beginning of somebody's career to allow them to understand what stress could be faced in the workplace. And that includes things like Road to Mental Readiness or AM Strength. I think what's interesting is that coming from that presentation, we may have lots of tools or all the tools we may need in our toolbox, but if there are periods of high stress, our ability to access those tools may not be there, or the tools may not be readily available. So at CSC, one of the main supports we can offer are those referral agents, the EAP referral agents. So those are people who not only can help people access different types of supports, but may, to go back to my analogy, be able to remind people of those tools that they have, even if cognitions are not limited, but impacted, or their emotions are becoming a more pertinent factor. And if those tools maybe aren't enough, I do know that for any Government of Canada employees, changes have been made to the health plan to make it easier for Government of Canada employees to access any kind of supports they may need from a mental health perspective. For example, seeing a social worker or a psychologist without a prescription and the opportunity to do it virtually and still get reimbursed through the public service health plan. With respect to positive changes, I have been hearing lots about site-specific wellness activities where people really are coming together to support each other. In addition, with respect to our CISM program and our EAP program, all the resources are still available, even though there's been innovations with how the programs are being delivered. So we are now being able to do CISM debriefs, not face-to-face, but they are still effective. And last but not least, I think you're going to hear lots about communications today, and I think that is a lesson learned, that consistent, pertinent communications to try to alleviate some of the stress of the unknowns and what people are going to be facing in terms of an unknown is so key, and I think that's also been a success at CSC.
So Scott, if you want to go ahead next. Oh, you're just on mute. Let me unmute you. There you go.
Okay, can you hear me? Am I on? Yeah, okay. Some of the things that we've done, you know, actually it's been over the last probably several years that we've kind of really come together, and it was mentioned, Megan had mentioned it about communication. And one of the things that we've done, and Christine can attest to this as well, is really expanding that net of communication. We're big families in the organizations that we work for. Most of us have a real strong appreciation for that family, but then there's the community, and that community is fire, EMS, corrections, RCMP, organizations like CIPSRT, foundations, so on and so forth, that are all multiple conduits of resources, information, and having an open dialogue and open communications can be really beneficial in coming up with something you didn't think about. Something that you know, another organization saw some really positive results from by implementing, and having that open communication on a community level as opposed to just within our own organizations is something that we've seen very beneficial, particularly over the last couple of years. And I think it's helped us to be in a position where you know, our peer support team, our wellness and fitness initiative has been touched on by Joy as well. These are components that go a long way to supporting our members and helping them managing their day-to-day. We tend to be creatures of habit. We have our routines. We tend not to do very well, and when I say this as a community and collective wise, we tend not to always do so well once we get pushed outside of those routines, or are not able to get, you know, work within those routines. So coming up with alternatives, excuse me, is really important, so that, like the analogy or the example that was given by Joy about the members that can't get to the gym, you know, that's something that's very common we're seeing across the board. And sometimes it's just a matter of kind of reprogramming, or the ideas, the concepts of what an individual may have as far as what's fitness. It's not about the hour and a half at the Good Life or the Mo Bodies. There's other forms of fitness. There's things that you can do, can work on at home, and sometimes they may just need those resources to help guide them in that direction. As far as getting the resources out to the membership, we've kind of done in Ottawa Fire, we've done kind of like a multi-level or multi-tier approach. We have our communiques coming from the chief, which tends to be the you know, the status of the day on COVID-19. We have publications coming out from the peer support team and the coordinators as far as tips and tricks on how to manage at home. With that, we also were, you know, integrated one that was sent out last week. It was 11 tips of things to manage COVID-19 and the different things can happen, whether stress, managing at home, getting along with the family, and all the rest of it. But in that, as things applied, whether it was relevant to our peer fitness trainers on the fitness and the nutrition side of it, and creating a direct link to that. So somebody reads that and tricks the switch in their head. It's like, oh, wait a minute, yeah, you know what? I have been struggling for that. They might not know until they read it, and then all of a sudden it trips the switch. Direct link to connect them with a peer fitness trainer. Same thing on the mental health components of and behavioral health components that were on the tips and tricks list. We had direct links to both our resource webpage for the Ottawa peer support team, and also direct link to our peer support team directly should somebody feel that, yeah, you know what, I really do need to have a chat with someone to reach out to somebody. So those are kind of some of the things that we've done in the past and have kind of evolved into the COVID-19 process, so to speak. And moving forward, takeaways. I think when you're dealing with a critical incident, the 20, 25, 30 people that are either directly or indirectly involved with that, that's not a hard sell. Usually weeks following that there's value in mental health, there's value in proactive behavioral health, and utilizing these resources out there, because they've gone through it, whether they were definitively affected by it or not, they would at least minimum have appreciation for the need. What we're dealing with here with COVID-19 is this here is a blanket exposure to a stress. So we're actually, from a mental health and behavioral health, a wellness coordinator perspective, not to say that there's a silver lining on COVID-19, but we actually have an opportunity where I think as a whole, our general populace and our rank and file and our workforce might be a little bit more receptive to some of the things that we're suggesting as far as coping mechanisms, the resources that are out there, things that they can access a resource, because all of a sudden it's, well, that happened to him or that happened to her. This is, wait a minute. Everybody is experiencing something with this to one degree, some more severe than others. So, that would be my suggestion moving forward, is to not to be opportunistic, but at the same time to realize the opportunity that's here to really have a broader captive audience than what we might have had 3 months ago.
Hey, Scott. Christine, I'm going to give the last word on this discussion to you.
All right, hi. I mean, a lot of the things have that we're doing at the paramedic service have kind of been mentioned, but I'll go through a few. And I think the big thing is the communication. And for us, the organization makes sure to have a consistent daily messaging, and it's just a one page that comes out every day at 3 o'clock. So everybody knows we're going to get this at 3 o'clock. It's simple and easy to read. And if it's something that's bigger, it just has the link where you can go on and look at it further. So I think that's something that's good, knowing when the messaging is going to come. It's not, it's not midnight, it's not 5 o'clock the next day. It's same time, same thing every day. Every day that people show up to work, there is daily staff screening, just to ensure that nobody that is possibly showing any symptoms is able to enter the building. So it keeps that feeling of safety for the people showing up to work every day, knowing they haven't failed any screening and everyone that's coming in the building is healthy. The organization has set up an email that anybody can email a question, a concern, a comment to, so that way it goes directly to the sort of the upper management level, so people are able to get their concerns voiced that way. Again, resources are made available either through email. It's messaged sort of on boards right at our headquarters as well. So in multiple different facets of ways of getting it out there in case someone's not checking their email. It's right on a board in front of them when they're walking into headquarters. They can snap a picture of it. We have EAP as well. People are, the number is posted as well. People can access that quite easily. Kind of one of the things that we've dealt with crisis in the past is making sure people's basic needs are met. And for us, one of the big things is, food and drink, nourishment. So one thing that the organization and the peer support team has done is made sure that there's, sounds silly, but there's coffee machines and coffee made available to everybody at numerous bases and at headquarters. We had a fridge brought in to keep milk and creamers, a place to keep any food that's been donated. So we kind of have a grab and go system as well, a freezer in place that we've got frozen meals in case someone was called in last minute, or just the stress at home, they didn't have time to prepare a meal. So knowing that you're coming to work and that there's going to be you know, a meal available to take with you for your shift kind of meets some of those basic needs for you know, nourishment. Prior to COVID, we also, the peer support team has 2 phone lines for everybody in the service that are answered 24/7. So if anyone's in crisis, just wants to talk, we have those phone lines made available, and so we can direct people, you know, different resources, things available, or sometimes it's just a vent and chat. In our headquarters as well, because we have about 700 employees in the building, and you know, not everybody knows everybody. So all of our peer support team members have what looks like a sports card, like a baseball or hockey card. So it gives our name, what platoon we're on, and our own personal cell phone numbers. So that way, you know, if someone's struggling or just wants to chat, they can look us up on that picture board and call us directly, kind of anytime, day or night. And everyone on our team was open to it and will gladly accept any of those calls. Think of our positive changes that we've seen is, you know, prior to COVID, we made sure that kind of everybody in the service had what we call sort of our penny jar. How do we keep our penny jar full, and what coping strategies do we use to keep that in place? So whether it's, you know, physical activity, hanging out with friends, those kinds of things. So people already had those tools, but now they've had to adapt some of those because obviously, like we were saying, you can't go to the gym and work out. So some of the adaptations are finding a good app, perhaps, that will direct you on how to do workouts from home. It's forcing you to run outside rather than on a treadmill inside. It's forcing us to learn to use technology in different ways, especially for people, let's say, who didn't grow up with technology. So the over 50 bunch, it's forcing them to learn new technology. And I think some of the positive changes from that are we're seeing a lot of people with new talents and new ways of kind of discovering things, cooking perhaps that they didn't do before. They're doing these online cooking classes and meal prepping that way. We also have another positive thing we've done is we have gratitude jars all over our headquarters. So you can go and put a coworker's name in the gratitude jar, and at the end of every week we kind of have a draw of we pick some names out of those jars and just kind of highlight them on our Facebook page. So we've created the peer support has created a Facebook page. It's a private group for everybody at our workplace, and it has 2 purposes. One is to offer help, and one is to ask for help. So and it's been a great resource for a lot of people. The other big change we've noticed is that the paramedics are reaching out to the peer support team to ask for help, but not for themselves, to help another coworker that they've noticed is struggling. So that's been a huge change, and we are really loving that, and it's going a long way. We're getting a lot of people saying, you know, I'm worried for my partner. They're just not acting, you know, the way that they normally would. I don't know how to talk to them. Can you guys do that? So we're so grateful that we're getting those reach outs, and we then reach out to the employee that may be struggling. Our biggest lesson learned kind of comes with that is that, you know, we are in the caring field and we hate to ask for help for ourselves. So the biggest things that we've noticed is that we need to reach in. We need to reach in to our coworkers, and it's as simple as making phone calls to workers. We do calls daily to people that are not in the workplace. We don't know why they're not there, but we're reaching in to check in to see how they're doing. Do they need help with something? We also have now a peer support member checking in with people at headquarters, keeping the, you know, the social distancing aspect, but it is a face-to-face check-in. And I think a lot of people are actually talking because we're asking. They normally wouldn't have talked because no one's asked, so why would they say anything? So I think that's our biggest take home, is that we need to reach in and we need to check in, because sort of with our profession, it's hard for us to reach out. It's just been the way it's been.
Thank you so much, Christine, and thank you all of you for those wonderful answers, letting us know what your organizations are doing. I'm really happy to hear of all of the great opportunities that the frontline workers are having to access assistance. Jeff, I'm going to move to you. I do have a question based on one of the graphs that you had presented on the slide regarding stress and performance. You had spoke about trying to maintain performance across that dotted line on the graph when a crisis hits, and that there is usually a decrease in performance when that occurs. If I'm subjected to similar occurrences over time as a frontline worker, in that what does that mean, or will that performance be impacted less because of these previous experiences? And I'm just going to let you know, I'm just going to give you about 3 minutes to answer that question, just because we're running short on time here.
Thanks for that question. So a couple of things. I brought the slide back up, and the answer is it depends. So if a person prior to the crisis has healthy coping strategies to get them through, then or has developed them, there's an inoculative effect, meaning that they are more likely to have learned how to get through in adaptive ways. However, without that type of change or knowledge or training or awareness, some people may continue to default to engaging in behaviors to cope that are more maladaptive. Maybe it's numbing from the impact. Maybe it's socially distancing or isolating themselves. And so, unfortunately, if a person engages in, whether it be a maladaptive way to cope, and it minimizes their either emotional suffering or their emotional pain, or helps them avoid, they will continue to do that. But if they learn new strategies at some point, intentionally or unintentionally, they get better results. They're more likely to generalize and use them. So this is where the pre-incident education that we use in a systematic resiliency and resistance course really becomes, from the moment that we have new recruits, we start to deliver a consistent message of what are the healthy coping strategies that you can use in order to get through this crisis. And we hope and we encourage, and with peer support, we begin to help people recognize the adaptive coping versus the maladaptive. So the answer is, it depends.
All right, thank you, Jeff, for that. So we are getting close to the end of our time here, and I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I am going to surprise you just a tiny bit with just our last question, which I'm going to ask everybody to give me one short answer. And I'm going to start with you, Angie. I would like you to tell me one thing that you personally are doing to cope with stress during this COVID crisis. And sorry, Angie, you're on the spot because I put you up first.
No problem. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you hear me, Emily?
Yeah, I can hear
okay,
you.
Great. One of the things that I am doing to cope with my stress is running. Running is what I use to cope with my stress in any given situation. So I'll run. I've been running like crazy every morning. I'll get up at 4 o'clock and prepare for my run. So that's my me time. No kids are looking for me, and I can go off on my run and relax.
All right, perfect. Thank you. That sounds, if I was a runner, that would sound fun, but I'm not, sadly. Megan, if you want to answer next.
In my head, I'm considering a joke, but I think what I will answer is definitely as well physical activity. So I'm somebody who's incredibly physically active. So I'm a triathlete, and so other than swimming, I'm still biking and I'm still running and keeping my body active to burn off all the extra energy and stress.
Scott, why don't you answer next? Oh, I think you're muted. Okay. I think you're muted. Okay. Oh, Scott, you're just muted. Oh, Scott, you're just muted.
How's that? Can you hear me?
How's that?
Perfect.
You're good.
All right, excellent. Yeah, likewise again, I mean, fitness is a big part of who and what we are, and not just for the demands of the job, but what has become as a coping mechanism as well. That and just trying to get different time outside. It's now that the weather's warming up and things are cleaning up. It's really enjoyed. I find I'm 2 or 3 weeks ahead on the yard cleanup than what I am typically this time of year, partly because of the weather, because it's been really nice in Eastern Ontario the last couple of weeks. But just really taking the time outside and taking in the fresh air, and might not be able to get out and visit with friends and family like we might traditionally do several times throughout the week, but at the same time too taking the opportunity to take that extra deep breath of fresh air and appreciate what's going on around you, and kind of practice that kind of mindfulness, kind of taking in what's going on in the moment sort of thing. And I make a point of trying to do that at least a half an hour a day, and sometimes it's more, depends on what's going on and what the weather's like outside, but I'm a big outdoors person, and fresh air and sunshine is huge for me.
Perfect. Thank you, Scott. Christine, why don't you go ahead next?
Sure. One of the things I've kind of picked up is yoga nidra, which is sleep yoga, and it's actually pretty amazing. And my kids, who are 8 and 10, love doing it. Took a week of them kind of laughing and giggling through some of it, but now that they're used to it, it's they love it as well. So it's a good anxiety and stress decreaser for me and the kids.
Thank you. Joy, how about you?
For me, I'm a talker. I know for people who know me, they'll laugh at that, but communication is big for me. Communicating with the members of the workplace relations team, we talk on a regular basis, and our national peer-to-peer coordinators across the country. Having that connection with them, I think, is a really big stress relief for me, knowing the challenges that each of them have and how we can solve those things together. Getting outside when the weather, as Scott said, when the weather is good, is really important to get out there, get some fresh air, practice the social distancing things that we have to have in place, and spending time with family that are in your own house, and playing Scrabble and doing things, getting back to the basics, I guess. Playing Scrabble every night after supper is something that myself and my family do. So it's, there's so many things that are specific to everyone. Each one of us has our own go-to things, but if everyone, no matter what your job is, whether you're corrections, police, fire, EMS, if you all take that one thing that you can do positive for yourself, I think the potential impact that all of this will have on us will be lessened because of that.
Well said, Joy. Thank you. Jeff, I'm going to give the last word to you on this.
Well, I think there's two things, both that come under the auspices of caring for others or contributing to others. So first of all, doing webinars like this and providing information to about 100 public safety organizations, meeting their needs because they're there to meet our community needs when we need them. The other thing is contributing to people that matter in my life. I do grocery shopping for my elderly parents, and I contribute to some of my friends that maybe aren't as mobile or at a higher risk. So I find that offering something to somebody else during this time of need really helps sort of stoke and makes me feel good through these difficult circumstances.
Well, I want to thank everyone again for joining me today. I really appreciate it. I know your time is very valuable, and it was a wonderful presentation. I want to remind everybody who's online to please complete the survey that's going to pop up after the town hall in your follow-up email tomorrow. A video of the town hall you watched today will be sent up as well in that follow-up email. Please consider joining us for our next town hall. It's going to be next Thursday, May the 7th. We are having kind of a little break. That town hall is going to be about leadership, and so we hope that you all can join us then. you still have any questions and would like answers, you can certainly send that to the email address provided. Again, thank you to my presenters. Your time is appreciated. You're all wonderful. And thank you for sharing your personal stories. I know I sprung that on you. Just on my end, board games have become something I enjoy again. So thanks again, everyone, and you have a great day.
Thanks for having me.
Thank
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Emily.